Welcome to Uncle Jimmy's podcast. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation.
What do you both think about fear?
I'm not in this world to live up to your expectations. I'm here to live up to mine.
He who is not courageous enough to take risks will accomplish nothing in life.
Fear is a teacher.
And I don't skip class.
Perfect. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Listen up. Today, we're bringing you a voice that doesn't just speak. It roars with courage, hope, and hard-won wisdom. She's a domestic adoptee born in 1965 who turned her own quiet questions into a national conversation. She's a trailblazing author, researcher, entrepreneur, and a fierce advocate who proves that the most powerful stories come from the places we once kept hidden. Listeners, please give a massive, heartfelt welcome to Jean Widner, the brilliant mind and brave heart behind the adoption paradox, putting adoption in perspective. Jean didn't just write a book. She sparked a movement. She's showing the world that adoption isn't a simple, happy ending. It's a profound, beautiful, complicated journey filled with love and loss, gratitude and growth. From her own awakening after decades in the fog to interviewing nearly 100 voices across the entire adoption constellation, Jean is here to remind every single one of us, real healing starts when we tell the truth. Jean, you are living proof that pain can become purpose. Silence can become a symphony, and one person's courage can light the way for thousands. Welcome to the show. We are so excited to have you here today. How you doing today, Jean?
Wow, I'm wonderful. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful, wonderful introduction. I'm so touched by that. Thank you.
So I'm so excited, right? We were just talking offline and everybody laughed, right? Because they always tell me, you should start interviewing right when people come on. But I find it very disingenuous, right? I like to have, a brief couple minutes before we start, right? Just to talk, because sometimes we let things out and we have conversations that people, sometimes that I feel are private, right? That start that bond between you and I, right? Because I tell people this, coming on my show isn't just about, it's my platform, right? But it's your journey, Jean. And that's the thing, right? My listeners aren't here to listen to me go on and on because I could. That's why on Wednesdays, we do Mental Health Wednesdays when I can just talk and do whatever I want and be silly. But we're going to get down to the nuts and bolts of it, right, Jean? So you were born in 1965, right? At a Salvation Army hospital for unwed mothers in Spokane and adopted at 2 months old. What was it like growing up as an only child, hearing the constant, chosen, special, wanted mantra?
My, yes, that is a mantra. Chosen and special and wanted. Oh my. It's funny. I was just talking with a friend today who's a fellow adoptee and a fellow writer and author. And it's like, we really do need to kind of drag these tropes out into the living room here and really talk about them because they can be really harmful. So let me walk it back though. Be fair where fair is due. In 1965, my birth mother, my first natural mother, was unmarried and 18. As I understand it, my father wouldn't marry her or couldn't support them. And so she did what pretty much every young woman who found herself in that circumstance in that era had to do, which was to relinquish their child to be adopted. I was raised by wonderful people, George and Mary and Kelly. They were great people. My dad was a school psychologist. My mom was a registered nurse. We're the perfect little family on paper. And I am an only child. So I'm the only one with, my little lived experience. And I say this in the book many times. It's like my parents got more right than wrong. They were running a lot on instinct. Even with my dad as a school psychologist, the predominant theory of the day was that we were all blank slates, that nothing mattered before the age of 3. The notion that there could be this pre-verbal trauma behind the scenes is just sort of ridiculous. My dad would literally say, anything that happens before conscious memory takes hold just doesn't factor. It just doesn't stay. Now, of course, we've done a complete 180. Psychology absolutely knows that we're sort of guests of our nervous system here, man. The body keeps the score, right?
No doubt about it.
So there is a heck of a lot of pre-verbal trauma, going on there beneath the surface. But the thing about it is being raised with that sort of, again, that chosen child trope and that special trope is, even though my parents got a lot right, they told me, I sort of grew up knowing, I don't recall ever being told that I was adopted. I just grew up with it in my background and I was proud of it. When I was 3 or 4, if you were introduced to me as an adult, I would toddle right up to you and say, I'm adopted. So I was proud of this. And there's also, as you start to grow, and start to kind of, play with your friends and, take your place in the world will say you were chosen. And it's like, what does that mean? How can I possibly have been chosen? What, picked out of a catalog like a pair of shoes?
Yeah.
How can I possibly be chosen? And so, it's our society's way of putting platitudes on something so that we don't have to talk about the hard stuff. We don't want to face the fact that maybe this child is going to have some confusion about their identity and where they came from. Maybe what I really needed was someone to sit down with me and really talk through, like, how did I come to be yours?
Yeah, and have that conversation.
Right. Because
Yeah.
kids can handle the truth.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you have to say certain things in age-appropriate ways so that they can wrap their head around it. But for most of us, we can handle the truth. What we can't handle is being lied to.
Exactly.
And so it's this need that we have to sort of try to put this into a pretty little box and focus only on what's in front of us now and say the other stuff doesn't matter. And then the problem with that when you're a kid is, what am I supposed to do with that?
Yeah.
I mean, my parents were relatively open when I had questions. I could ask those questions and I could receive answers the best that they knew how, but they weren't given any good direction on how to have these conversations, mind you.
Yeah.
So they're running on instinct. But what that does is it leaves me confused. And so then if I'm confused as a kid, what I tend to be is silent. And so if I'm silent, then everybody assumes I don't have a problem.
Exactly.
But the truth
like everything's
is
okay. Everything's perfect. Everything's good.
I'm trying to
Yeah.
work through something really complicated, and I'm trying to do that on my own. And when you really start to evaluate that, like, why should we be doing that to a 10-year-old?
Yeah. Exactly.
And so that's the really troubling part with this is, come on, you guys, we're just trying to put a pretty bow on something that really needs much more honesty around it.
Yeah. Honesty and conversation, right? And have those talks, like you said. It must have been so tough, right? Growing up and you must have had so many questions, right? And I'm going to get into that about questions about, who your mom was, who your dad was, right? And so your adoptive mom, right? She struggled with alcoholism, right? And prescription drugs.
Yeah.
While your dad was a school psychologist, right? How much did those family dynamics shape your childhood,
Hugely. Fortunately, I know you've touched on, other people who come from, addiction and their backgrounds. I mean, my father was not willing to face the fact that he had a pharmacy, in his own bathroom.
House,
In his own, bathroom cabinet. And my mother, as a registered nurse, was working the system really well. She had 6 or 7 different doctors prescribing her drugs. So they wouldn't
Yeah.
figure out exactly how much she was consuming. Where that left me, unfortunately, the way that I describe my childhood is I just didn't know from one day to the next which mommy I had.
Which one was going to show up?
Exactly. It's like I would wake up in the morning and she'd be bitter and angry, and I would just shove my cereal in my mouth and get to school as quick as I
get
could.
out the door, yeah.
And then I'd come home and she'd be singing a happy tune and ironing or whatever she was doing. And or some days it'd be the reverse. She'd start out the day fine and I'd come home and she'd be in a rage, and I wouldn't, again, what is a kid supposed to make of that? Kids are very
so many highs and lows, right?
Yeah. And kids are very egocentric. So of course it's my fault.
Exactly.
And so
You blame yourself naturally.
Right. So then I'm internalizing that. And I mean, the way that manifested in our family was I just left. I mean, I will say one of the things about an only child is you don't have any siblings. So if you want to go to the pool, if you want to go to the mall, if you want to go to the movies, you become the instigator. And so in a lot of ways, I think that really saved me because I would just come home, I would get in my play clothes, and I was gone. I was gone as fast as I could be. And that stayed all the way into my teen years, to when then, I had a whole lot more freedom and independence. And so I have to be honest and say that my way of dealing with that was I just distanced myself from her as much as I humanly could. And that
must have been tough too, right, Gene? That must have been tough too, because as a kid, right, you want that connection with your mom. Right. You want to be able to have those conversations. You want to be able to talk to her, right? And then you got your dad, your adopted dad, George, right? Who I feel is, from what you're saying is just threw up the blinders and just pretended everything was okay, right?
You
Like so
know,
many men do.
yeah, I mean, again, he did his best, but no, he was in complete denial, and
Yeah.
he was always trying to make peace. He was always the peacemaker between mother and I. He was always
Yeah.
just trying to go along and get along and just try to keep his wife on an even keel and try not to have his daughter too upset. And that was just, unfortunately the dynamic, that happened there. I mean, my mother did begin her journey to sobriety when I was about 15.
Okay.
I'm glad for that. I'm very glad for that. And she did get, 40 some years of sobriety under her belt before she
Wow.
departed this earth. So she did well. And when I was a young adult, we did get to recalibrate our relationship.
I
But
was
as
just going to ask
far
that.
as
Yeah.
like my ability to have a mommy, that true, I didn't have a mother. I really
Yeah,
didn't.
it was too far. You were too old at that point, and then and not that you were too old, right? Too let down so many times, so often, right? Of coming home, and again, what kid wants to come home, right? And throw on their clothes, run out the door, and probably stay out till the latest that you could, right, to avoid her. And you're a kid, Thank goodness, right? She did get sober, which is a great thing, right? And you did say your relationship changed a little, right? But you still didn't have that mom that you always wanted.
Yeah,
You know?
no, definitely not.
Yeah, that must have been tough,
It's you just have to live with understanding that and then figuring out how to, we talk about inner child work and all of that kind of stuff and but
Yeah.
it is, I mean, it's for sure it's there, and the only thing I can do for myself now is to recognize how to have those really precious relationships in my life and how to manage when things are setting off inside of me. It's like, okay, what's that really about?
Yeah.
But it hurts. I mean, hell, it
Yeah.
hurts.
Yeah. So for decades, right, you convinced yourself that adoption had zero impact on you despite the mostly positive home, right? What finally cracked that belief after your adoptive parents passed around 2020?
It was beginning to research and read. I started my journey very, very late, although it's funny because I talk to a lot of adoptees and I'm also in very good company in that category. So it's funny. A lot of us a lot of adoptees just will not go there while their parents are alive. They just won't. And it's
And what do you think that stems from? What do you think that stems from?
Everybody's different.
Yeah.
So everybody's going to have their own answer to that. For me, it was too complicated. And the other thing that is unique to me, I will say, is one of the mantras that I convinced myself of, actually, is I allowed my own feelings of low self-worth to convince myself that I didn't deserve to look for my first family.
Okay.
That I would never want to harm my first natural mother by showing up at her doorstep one day and disrupting her life. That I would never want to do that to her. And I realized that, because that is one of the things that is something that I do struggle with very deeply, is that core shame and that core lack of self-worth, which unfortunately you've got both the separation from my natural mother, which I've learned is a very real thing. And I feel that with inside myself, and then top it off with, I didn't have a bonding experience with my adoptive mother. So we've got a double whammy there. And the way that manifested itself for me for sure is a lack of self-worth. So I not only bought into the mantra of the noble suffering first mother, who nobly gives me away for a better life and all of that, I also convinced myself that I didn't deserve a relationship with her and that I would never entertain searching for her because I wouldn't want to hurt her.
Yeah.
Kind of messed up when you really think about that.
It really is.
My dad always was like, even when I was a teenager, and I would say that thing that most adopted kids do at some point, do the whole, you're not my real parents, you're not my real mother. We fling that at our adopted parents. Most kids do that at some point, usually in the teen years, the rebellious phase, right? And it was funny because my dad's response to that was brilliant. I can clearly see, because what he said was, he would go, "Wow, that's fantastic. If you ever go find your birth mother, I hope you do. I'd love to meet her someday and thank her." which is two things. Number one, look at the incredible amount of grace he's showing to my mother.
Yeah.
Well, instead of shaming her for, all the things that our society shamed them for back then. But it also sure as hell knocked on the fire out of my bit, because, he just went, that'd be fantastic,
Yeah.
So even with all of that grace, though, in there, I just never allowed myself to entertain it. And I know that this is true for a lot of adoptees. It's too painful to have that conversation. And there's a cultural perception of like, somehow you're being ungrateful or you're being disloyal by wanting to know or by even wanting a relationship. And so for all of those reasons, for me, I tucked it in, I tucked it away. I didn't want to look at it. 2020, things change. So then I changed.
Yeah.
And that began the journey.
So you began searching, right, for your birth family right after losing your adoptive parents, right? What was the most shocking or emotional moment during that early search?
Definitely. I was very fortunate when my mother's state was North Carolina. She went all the way to Washington State to have me. And so had I been born in North Carolina, I wouldn't have access to my original birth certificate, but because I was born in Washington, I did. So that was the first thing, was to send away for my original birth certificate. And then, boom, that showed up. I don't know, 8 weeks later. We had an ancestry panel and my mother-in-law was really, really good at researching. And I said, Mom, I'm too close to this. You know what I mean? Because for the first time I had a name. I had her name. And then I knew that she was from North Dakota. Like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Methinks. And so I handed this off to my mother-in-law and I said, you're better at this than I am. And I'm too close. So please do what you can. And it surprised the heck out of me because 3 hours later, this is a Saturday morning, she calls me and she says, okay, you go sit down in front of the computer because I got something to show you. And then here comes my mother's high school senior year photo. And that is the moment. I've never seen my own features reflected back at me before.
Yeah. And what did you feel in that moment?
There's too many words. There's too many feelings. The whole shock, just the wonder and the magic of that. And then also the sadness, of thinking, she's just this young girl.
Yeah.
She's just a girl, not that different from me at the age of 18. There's that wonder of how much I look like her and seeing those features and all of those things. But it's also, she becomes real in that moment in a way that has never been able to be seen before.
Yeah.
And so that brings home so many things. So it rocks your world for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you get to the point, right, where you get contact information for her, right?
We find her. Yeah, we do. And so I did write her a letter, which, goes through 47 different drafts of, ways to say things and how to try to find the right way to say what you want to say, which is, in my case, mostly just, you did your best. Good people raised me. I think I'm a good person. Whatever happened, I don't blame you, and blah, 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 all the things. And I got no response for quite a few years until just a couple of years ago, where she lives in a different state now. And I was headed to a conference actually in that state. And actually it was an adoption related conference. So I had a lot of friends and there was going to be a lot of community there. And so I wrote her again. And it had been, doing the math, 3 years without a response. I'd sent a few other Christmas cards and things like that. And I could see it looked like she was married. And so you want to be careful because you have to recognize that the people around her may not know.
Yeah.
So I wrote her again when I was headed to that conference. And I said, I recognize your husband may not know. I would meet you anywhere. Would just love to see your face. I just would love to just meet you once. And while I was at the conference, I sent that letter like a couple of weeks before I went. And while I was at the conference, my husband was here at the house and he got the letter from her saying she didn't want to meet up or be in touch and rejecting contact. And indeed saying that because the people in her life don't know and she doesn't want to open up that door. It's too painful. And so that, I think, is the real tragedy of this really horrendous closed adoption system that we had back then, and the way that so many of these young women had so much shame put upon them
Yeah.
for having the nerve to be pregnant out of wedlock. It's like, oh, for the love of Pete, yes, she had sex. I mean, can we please just not pile that much judgment on people?
Yeah.
But that's what we did back then. And unfortunately, a lot of those young women, like my mother, who were sent away, put in circumstances where they were not treated very nicely, and they were not treated with dignity and care. And sadly, some of them are still not being treated with dignity and care. You know, I think there's this systemic shame that is still present in adoption to this day, because how could you? How could you have done this thing? How could you have put your family through this and all of this? I think we still heap an awful lot on everyone in adoption, and I think it's really tragic. So that's our story for now.
Yeah.
You know, she could change her mind.
Yeah. Yeah, that's tough. That's tough to hear, because everyone seems to think that there's always a, at the end of the storm, there's always, a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right? And here you have the no contact. So it's almost rejection again, right? For you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, it's painful. And I have to face that I can know no, both intellectually and in my heart. I can know that it doesn't have anything to do with me. It's not a rejection of me as a person. Yeah. I don't need to internalize that, and it's not fair to ask her to fix me, that's not her job, and I also can't fix her, that
Exactly.
it's a big lesson in control, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet I feel incredibly sad for her, because I don't think she's had any other children. She doesn't marry, as far as I know, until she's 39.
Wow.
And so I think to myself, right, like, to live your life not being seen in the fullness of all of who that you are.
You are, yeah.
Which is a mother. She is
Yeah,
a
and
mother.
that's, when you said, she didn't want to rehash, come back to it. She didn't want to rehash it. She was, the hurt, the pain, right? But she also didn't want others to know what she had, gone through at, 18, right? And I think society itself, I don't care if you're 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, it takes a lot of strength, right? To put your kid, right, into adoption, right? Because here you are giving up your own kid, your own blood, right?
Mhm.
And I'm not, taking your mom's side, but I'm just saying it's one of those things where it's powerful, right? To think that somebody can give up their own kid, right, for the better of you. Think about, if your mom tried to keep you, 18 years old, everything she was struggling with, how different life could have been, right? With just your mom, right? It's sometimes I think, society itself and the way it likes to shame people, we need to change that, right? And change the narrative and change the way, unwed mothers and teenage pregnancies, the way that it's treated, right? It should be treated quite differently rather than shaming, right? It should be looked at a beautiful thing as a beautiful child's coming into this world, right? Regardless
Yeah.
of the age of the person.
Yeah. I mean, it's just really systemically unfair, the way that we judge people in these circumstances, and definitely back then, but we also still do that. And that some of these shameful traditions, if you will, carry forward into our conversations.
50 plus years later, it's still going.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you committed, right, to 5 a.m. writing sessions every weekday plus weekends, right, for 3 straight years while still running your businesses, right? How close did you come to burnout during that grind?
I never did. It's funny. I got up every day and I knew exactly where I was. I knew exactly what I was working on, whether I was in the process of, doing some research or summarizing something, or I was, okay, now I need to edit such and so story, into this section. It's like I hit the ground running for all of those years. That clarity of purpose managed to sustain me. So
no, that's great, because, sometimes you get that in your head, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to do this. And then once you stop putting pen to paper, right, it's a lot of, going back, sitting in those dark places where you were, as a kid, as a child. as a teenager, right? Sometimes people can stop, right? And they can bring themselves down a dark path again. You know, when this came on top of, right? And you had built and sold, right, 2 successful e-commerce companies, right, with your husband. And you ran Boulder City Social, right? And lived a full life traveling in your camper van, right? When did you first feel the pull to shift everything toward writing about your adoption?
You know, I mean, I made the decision in 2021, and it was, you know, my husband and I were sitting around, and you know how it is. I mean, you know, I turned 61 in a couple of days, right? So I'm not yet
Yeah.
in the autumn of my life, but I can see it from here. Okay. You know, and we were sitting there talking, and he's like, "What is still your white whale? Like, what do you think you might still really want to do?" And I said, "I want to write a book.
Yeah.
I think I'm ready to write a book." And he's like, "Well, you know," he's like, "Fiction or non?" And I'm like, "Non, because it's the only thing I care about. I'm a stupidly curious person, sometimes much to my own detriment. It's like if I go down a rabbit hole, I really want to understand how something works and how it affects people and all the things." And so I said, it's got to be nonfiction. Plus, I also love to take an underdog position. I love to fight for something that isn't getting talked about or being seen. And so, you know, we're sitting there and he's like, "Well, what about the adoption thing?" I'm like, "Yeah." You know, and that was it. I mean, I made up my mind. The smartest thing I will say that I did, and I need to give a shout out, is I hired 2 researchers who were both young ladies who were near me here at UNLV, who were psychology and psychology adjacent majors. So Sadie Hinson and Zen Bayless. Boom. These young women really helped a lot. I would probably still be writing if it was not for them helping me with all of the research and amassing all of the studies and the data and the statistics and all of that. So that then made it so I had summaries to work with. And then, you know, the research always had to lead the way. But then the storytelling was then the thing that I could work.
So what role did your husband play, right, in supporting you through the emotional and practical demands of this journey?
Boy, did he learn how to listen. You know,
That's a tough trait for a man, too.
we cracked the code a while ago in our marriage, thank God, which is, you know, because women process verbally and vocally, men process physically, right?
Yeah.
You know, you guys are good to go take a walk or, you know, go shoot something or play basketball. That's how you process, but women do it verbally. And so one of the great keys for us was us unlocking the whole idea. He goes, "Wait, do I need to do anything? Do I need to fix something or do I just get to listen?" I'm like, "Just listen." Cool. Now he knows his role, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you know what I mean? I gotta say, I mean, we both will sometimes say it's like, can we go back to thinking that adoption was awesome? It was a lot easier then.
Yeah. Once you stop peeling that layer of the onion, right, it shows you.
That's a fact. Yeah.
Yeah, because that gets into my next question, right? You interviewed nearly 100 people across the entire adoption constellation for the book, right?
Yeah.
Whose story merited your own the most, and who's surprised you the most?
Well, I mean, adoptees are all over the map, you know.
Yeah.
Some of us have great experiences. Some of us have terrible experiences. Most are somewhere in between or a combination thereof.
Yeah.
Foster care is rough. That shouldn't
Really
surprise
rough.
anybody. That shouldn't surprise anybody to hear that.
I've just heard horror stories from the foster care system.
Yeah,
one after another, you know?
Yeah. You know, I mean, there is no one. I would say that the birth parents, for sure, they're the least researched and they're the least, I think, understood role in the constellation. I will say also adoptive parents also surprised me in terms of what so many of them have gone through. And I have a lot of empathy for, again, I think a group of people who are not as well prepared for what they're walking into. And again, it's because of these sort of simplistic tropes that we have. It's just another way to build a family. And it's such a beautiful thing. And, you know, the whole rescuing a child thing, which, you know, is another thing that really sets my teeth on edge. But I think that most adoptive parents are just still told, it's like, just bring the kid home and love it like it's yours and everything will be fine. You know,
Yeah.
it's not that simple, because one of the things that I talk about in the book is, and I don't know if it's a theme you want to bring up earlier, but I think so many people in the entire constellation are struggling with what we call disenfranchised grief,
Yeah.
which is a grief that our society doesn't know what to do with and doesn't know how to recognize. And so I think it's easy for people to understand, like, okay, so we'll start with the relinquishment, that is something that is outside the realm of a normal human experience, right?
Yeah.
And nobody knows what to do with that. No one knows what to say to them. They don't know how to process that information. And so relinquishing birth parents are left just on their own to try to figure out this monumental thing that has just occurred for them. Then you have the adoptive parents who are oftentimes, most often maybe, coming to adoption from a place of infertility. And
Yeah.
so they've undergone maybe miscarriages, maybe endless, failed rounds of IVF, this deep feeling of desperation to want to be a parent, which is the most natural thing there is, right? We
Yeah.
are all deeply embedded with the desire to procreate, right? That's a part of the animal kingdom, mantra there in the core of our stem brain here at the very center of it all. But the desire for that very heartfelt thing to build a family. So, and again, our society, I don't think, acknowledges those losses very well. Then there's the third piece of it that I think most people don't understand and don't really process well, which is the idea that as an infant, I'm grieving.
Yeah.
That I, as an infant, am deeply physically bonded to my biological parent. And when you separate me from her, this wounds me. Again, my body keeps the score. My nervous system knows I'm not with her.
Yeah.
And that grief then is cyclical through all of us. And so those themes emerged throughout. And so it's impossible for me to say like any one story or like one thing that surprised me the most, other than to just say everyone surprised me a little, maybe.
Yeah. Everyone's story. Yeah.
Everybody has like that one thing that they said where I went, whoa,
Where it hits
and
you.
it didn't. Yeah. And again, that can be in what to all outward purposes, it's a beautiful family. It's a perfect adoption. Nothing's wrong here. I feel fine. I'm great. And then there's that thing.
Yeah. So writing The Adoption Paradox, right, meant revisiting your own losses, rejections, and family secrets. Did any part of the writing process feel like it was breaking you open all over again?
Certainly. I will say, I've joked about this, I'm not writing a memoir. I'm writing about other people, which is a great way to hide from your own stuff. It's a great way to hide. You can just kind of push on through. But the truth is that of course it impacted me. Of course it did. Of course, there were times when a memory would flash back that I hadn't thought of in forever. And it'd be like, my God, I forgot about that. I forgot that happened, or I forgot that I did that thing. Definitely there would be times when I would feel something deeply shifting within myself.
Yeah, so because it brings you back, right? Like you said, you're sitting there and a thought would come and you could probably picture it in your head of you being right there, right? In that same room, probably the same smells you could think, you could smell, and the same, what you were thinking at the time. And that's the hardest thing, like I was saying with writing, sometimes people, when you are writing about your life and you go through it and there's so much that, I find, and I tell people this, when I'm writing, I go from, obviously mind, pen to paper, right? And that's the best for me. And even, I had this therapist years ago who I would come in and I would do sessions with him. And for the first 20 minutes, he would give me my journal and I would write in it for 20 minutes. And then he would take the journal and put it on the shelf, and then we would have a discussion. And I couldn't take the journal with me. It was something that I would write and he would keep in his office. And then we would revisit it the following week, right? And we would have these conversations, right, that would break so many breakthroughs, right? But it brings me back to when I write, of sitting in his office, of going through it, right? So now when I try to solve problems, right, I literally write it out. And it's like, say I had a problem at work and it was 9 a.m. It's like 9 a.m. problem comes in. Okay. tried this, diagnosed this, this is the problem, right? And I write it through and people are like, you're always writing. And I'm like, but for me, that's how I'm able to process things, right? Because that's how I learned the best way to process and to be able to come up with a solution as well. And when it's writing, right, I've been writing about my dad and my mom, and I get to points sometimes where I'm thinking of mom and dad, that have, my dad's been gone 16 years, my mom a little over 4, and where I put the pen down, I just can't go any further, right? Because it's too raw and it's too, it just brings me back. Sitting there on Christmas, and I remember my dad coming down sick one day on Christmas, and my dad screaming and yelling as we're opening gifts, and we didn't pay much attention to him because they were the gifts, right? And dad's coming down yelling, and I was laughing, but it just brings me back to those certain things. So I can only imagine, right, the times that you probably sat there with pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, right, where you probably stopped and you had to, take it all in, take a deep breath, but you pushed forward, right? You pushed through. And so now, right, you call yourself not anti-adoption, right, but pro-truth. Looking back, right, at your full arc, what's one truth you wish you had known as a younger woman?
That there was work here too, that there was work to be done here too. I wished I would have been willing to look at that. And this, I think, goes back to some of the ways that, because kids are left to themselves to process a lot of this, discerning with more adult eyes and adult feelings, I can be critical of adoption processes. I can understand the ways that relinquishment and the pre-verbal trauma from that has harmed me. And that's not a criticism of my parents.
Yeah.
Right? And that saying that doesn't make me disloyal to them. It doesn't still mean that I can't love them. It still keeps all of my feelings of gratitude fully intact because they didn't know. I mean, we have to give people the grace for living in the times that we're living in, that they're living in then. We can't view everything through a 2026 lens back at 1965.
Exactly.
I mean, we can and we will, and we can go, well, that was dumb or evil or stupid or prejudiced or whatever, right? And though we still have to acknowledge that this was the world as it was in 1965. And these were the rules of conduct that everybody had to abide by. And one of those rules was that, adoption is a solution to infertility. And one of those rules was, well, just take the baby home and love it as though it's yours, because it is.
Yeah.
And I can't blame my parents for not knowing what we didn't know, And so that's, for me, one of the things that I wish I could have unhooked that all, when I was younger, because it was very easy to understand the effects of growing up with addiction. And I'm incredibly grateful for adult children of alcoholics, the 12-step program that I worked on in myself in my 20s and 30s. I so wish I would have understood. And I so wish my parents could have understood that there was that other layer that really needed it.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
So a couple more questions right before we finish. So where can people find you and find the book?
Absolutely. Adoptionparadox.com. The book is available there. The book is available on Amazon too. And we'll soon have an audiobook version coming out. So you can look for those links too for sure on my website. I'll make sure. So perfect.
So how has this entire journey, right, from silent adoptee to author and advocate, change your sense of identity and belonging?
I'm going to go with belonging first. One of the greatest joys has been finding a community that is just really extraordinarily special. You have so many adoptees. I will say this. One thing the pandemic did was it moved everything online. You had all of these tiny micro in-person support groups all over the nation, probably in all sorts of different topics and ways, from book clubs to this, to that, to the other thing. But definitely within the adoption community, you had all of these one-off and disparate groups that didn't have any online community. Now, in 2020, and then by the time I'm, joining the community in 2022 or so, you have activism that is already happening online. And so the belonging piece for me is huge. There's all these other wonderful adoptees that I know now that are in support groups, and amazing, amazing first and natural parents, and amazing adoptive parents, and counselors and social workers. I have a huge community. So I love that. The other thing that has changed for me, I would say, is we have work to do, and I feel like within myself, I've grown to a place where I've never wanted to be the person out front. That's never really been my gig. My husband was always far more comfortable in front of the microphone than I am. But now I'm kind of like, nah, I got things to say and we have work to do. And I feel hopeful about that.
Yeah. So you volunteered, right, with adoption support groups and continued sharing publicly even after the book's release. What keeps you going when the emotional labor feels heavy?
Sometimes you got to step away, for sure.
Yeah.
Nature, community. I feel really fortunate in that I have some really good friends and a diverse crowd of friends.
So you got a village.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sometimes I need to just go, I don't want to think about adoption. I'm not adopted right now. I mean, you've got to take breaks, right? It's like, but definitely being in nature, taking the van out, hanging with my husband, the dogs, going for walks and just, trying to take care of myself too, right?
Yeah. That's one big thing that we
Alcohol's
often
fun,
forget
but
about.
it's not a permanent answer.
Yeah. So last question, right? So if you could go back and sit with your younger self, the little girl in that mostly positive home, what would you tell her now about the road ahead?
You're going to be okay.
Yeah.
You're going to be okay.
Yeah. So Gene, from the deepest part of my heart and from every listener leaning in right now, thank you. Thank you for walking back into your own fog when it would have been so much easier to stay hidden. Thank you for bleeding onto those pages so that thousands of people who felt alone in their story no longer have to. Thank you for showing us that even the strongest among us carry wounds, and that those wounds can become the very light that guides others home. Listeners, if Gene's words have touched that tender place inside you, if they've stirred a question you've been afraid to ask, a grief you've never named, or a hope you thought was lost, please don't let this moment pass. Grab the Adoption Paradox, reach out to her, share your story, because Gene has given us all permission to feel the loss and the love at the same time. Every adoption begins in separation, but thanks to brave souls like Gene, it doesn't have to end in silence. It can end in connection, in understanding, in a love that's deeper, wiser, and more honest than we ever dreamed possible. Gene, you didn't just write a book. You opened your heart and invited the world to heal inside it. You are a rare and beautiful gift. The door here is always open. Please come back anytime. Until next time, family, hold your stories gently, speak your truth bravely, and never forget, your pain has purpose, your voice matters, and healing is always possible when we do it together. We love you. We'll see you on the next episode. God bless. And Gene, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's been an honor. Thank you.